warmly welcoming two domes on November 8th, which marks the beginning of the second long weekend in November, connected to November 11th, our Independence Day. And it's nice. The weather may not spoil us. As you can hear my voice, the cold beer did its job yesterday, but in such noble company, so you must forgive me. We are recording this faster than the 200th episode of WSI this year, which is a multi-range news service, so a small anniversary. And we, with Marek, will focus on what we will present to you shortly. Listen, to be clear. When we are recording, I don't know what he wants to show me, but he wants to see my face, how I will react to it, so the reaction will be authentic, not prepared. But remember, if you like it, we especially count on likes, comments, shares, subscribing to the Kapitan.lisowski channel, and supporting all our social media. In Marek's case, especially Twitter. Also, watch his materials on ISB News.
I'm also on Mastodon, yes, too. Also so that there is already one like that, too.
I used to fight there too, but for now, practically speaking, I don't really feel this Mastodon. Maybe there is just too much of everything, I don't know.
Yes, because it is in a way that is very Linux-like. But why not actually? So we will start with this, Maciek, that recently, just a few days ago, it was the day of the Russian military intelligence officers. And for this reason.
Honestly, it is a special holiday for the officers themselves because the soldiers...
For this reason, the chairman of the Defense Committee of the State Duma of the Russian Federation, Andrei Kartapolov, extended his wishes to them. He sincerely extended his wishes to them, and now boom. Check your Twitter. This is how he did it.
So, at this moment, my dear ones, I am going there. Oh, damn. Oh, my. All right, now I will try this for you. I will try to show it to you now. But really, you hit me right between the eyes. Very much between the eyes.
When I saw that, I also had my jaw around my knees.
You know that I can't be silent too often. Surprised. For a moment, it worked. And now I will try to show it to you. And I don't know who has seen it already, and if they have. But it got to me. I'll say this. If you wanted to make my day, well, you succeeded. And now, my dear ones, you will see it. Ta-da!
Well, that's right. Here it is.
Think about that.
I would say that it is very timely.
It is exceptionally timely, completely not coincidental, and considering where he gets the funds to operate his company, which I made material about, yes. And these funds were from a bank that officially cannot operate in the States. I apologize for disappearing for a moment, but it turned out that someone was tidying up my desk.
And your camera fell.
No, it's not that my camera fell, but first of all, he disconnected me. What is it called? First, he disconnected my internet cable. Second, calm down, I will be back soon. And it turned out that when I tried to connect everything now, my camera disappeared for a moment, and I hope I can return. I see that after every absence from home, I have to do a full check of everything, because if my wife gets to my workspace, they will surely find me.
A good wife always makes sure you have things cleaned up. So don't complain about it.
I will put up a sign here. Touch it, and you will regret it. Well, I guess so, because otherwise it can't be.
Buy a rat.
Generally, yes.
Buy yourself a rat, put it on our desk, then no one will go there.
I am picking up the crumbs from the floor?
No.
With this photo?
No.
I understand one thing, that Kartapolov knew exactly what goal he wanted to achieve. To stir things up to the max. But this is a thick joke.
very much. This is a thick joke. This is a very thick joke. Unfortunately, I would say it may come back as a big, very painful hiccup.
I'll say this. I think that with the two phenomena that are currently in the States, the first phenomenon, the unlimited ambition of Elon Musk, and equally unlimited ambition and obsession with himself in the performance of Donald Trump, may cause that. It will cost them a lot.
A lot, exactly.
This joke may cause Trump to raise the level of American aid to Ukraine.
I would expect him to really get pissed off. Oh yes, this is really serious. Well, one more cheerful piece of information before we move on to serious matters. A Russian source, and I would say a legitimate source, reported on what North Korean soldiers do after service. Well, North Korean soldiers, I quote, behave like cats in March because they had very limited access to internet services at home. So now they watch all the pornographic sites. What interests them the most are all the sites with white women, especially those cow-like blondes of the Russian type. And they can watch it after service even, reducing their sleep time to a few hours. They can sit at those computers they acquired, no matter how basic, as long as they can access the internet, watching porn for 6 hours straight.
This is called indoctrination.
I personally think that those who survive will return to Korea not the same.
You know what? I believe that those who return will perhaps indeed first be thrown into a special camp for re-education.
Well, for sure. Now we will move on to more serious matters, which on one hand will cause us embarrassment, and on the other hand will be an important clue, namely to a very important Estonian report. We have talked about this many times, Maciek, that if there were to be a future war, it would start with the Baltics, and the Estonians say that if there is to be a future war, it will indeed start with us.
Because they are, looking at the map, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. And Estonia is the most of all, being the farthest protruding peninsula, thus the easiest to grasp and cut off from the others.
Yes, and on the other hand, the most difficult for us as NATO to defend. So, what did the Estonians do? They made a report, and now we will talk about this report. They started by calculating that Russia has spent 7 times more on the war than the entire Estonian state budget, which is this year, namely 115 billion euros. And in the near future, this amount is expected to increase even more. And here they remind Putin that he said he would expand the army to 1.5 million soldiers and create a new military structure near the border with Estonia, which means that at least on paper, many existing base units there will increase at least 2 or 3 times.
I would like to remind you that I have already informed about 3 brigades that did not even have numbers yet, only patrons. And the patrons were chosen deliberately. 1 referred to the Estonians, 1 to the Lithuanians, and 1 to the Latvians. And this structure is being formed at the height of the border with each of these countries. It is now known that it will be expanded to army structures at the height of each of these countries. So their Russian army is de facto a reinforced division. This means a minimum of 3 to 4 general military brigades.
If we are dealing with a combined army that is a joint one, then the forces you are talking about increase by 1.5 times.
So there won't be much of that.
Yes. Well, let's move on. Here it is mentioned that war propagandists like Solovyov and Skabayeva regularly attack Poland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and they promise to restore Russian power in the Baltic states through an attack. So what potential would that state have, right? What aggressive state would be beyond Estonia? What would happen if a lame peace was concluded, freeing the troops from Ukraine? And we reach the analytical part of this report. They selected 24 militarily important locations, checked them via satellite to compare with photos taken before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And the analysis of the images was conducted by Ukrainians from What's In for Ukrainians. Then our Lithuanian, Latvian, Estonian soldiers and NATO soldiers were asked, probably from European NATO countries, Sweden, Norway, and Finland come to my mind as interested. And they commented on what it was about. Now it has been calculated how it would look 300 kilometers from the border, that is within the range of ETAG CMS, to see how part of Russia is secured by military facilities. And here, OSINT for Ukrainians found over 100 facilities. Radar stations, not in the best condition, military towns, and bases and field bases. Theoretically, this is just a legacy of the Cold War that Putin keeps alive, and satellite images show that many Russian military bases near Estonia have been halved in recent years. Desolate that deep storage bases could be identified. Deep storage warehouses that are already almost empty. But, as the Estonian stated, it cannot be said with complete certainty whether everything has been transported to Ukraine. Some are in factories, some may be in military units, but there are often significantly fewer military vehicles in the parking lots of the bases. This means they are becoming desolate. On the other hand, let's remember, what forces would need to be used? And we have a base and an airport in Pskov here. It is just 35 kilometers southeast of the Estonia-Russia border. There is stationed the 76th Air Assault and the 2nd Spetsnaz, which is a Spetsnaz brigade. These are rapid response units that the Russians would definitely use if there was a need for a sudden attack, to seize key areas, attempt to capture the capital, as was supposed to happen with Kyiv, to capture or kill state leaders or other important figures, such as the General Staff. Now, the head of the Military Intelligence Center of the Estonian Defense Forces, Colonel Antki Wilczek, provides an example. If Putin wanted to attack Estonia to exert pressure on NATO, the task of the 76th and 2nd, the task of the Spetsnaz, would probably be to seize some key position or capture a military base, to create confusion or demonstrate capabilities. At the same time, they may also try to attack, seize, or sabotage communication and data centers or target VIPs, just as was supposed to happen in Ukraine. That's what, and the colonel here says, that's what Colonel Wilczek says here. In the case of a Russian attempt to seize Estonia, these units would likely be used to attempt to capture airports or strategically important locations so that Russian air defense could be deployed there and prevent NATO airstrikes. But on the other hand, when the Planet Labs satellite flew over Pskov in June of this year, burn marks were still visible on the runway asphalt. They were left there after the attack by the Ukrainians, who directed a swarm of drones at this airport from a distance of 700 kilometers on the night of August 29th last year. The fire caused the destruction of 2 I-76 transport aircraft, with 2 more damaged. Well, the Russians have moved all the aircraft based there to the east at this point. That drone attack also had a significant impact on the training of the division, as security was quite modest. Then the Russians realized that since this base is within range of the Ukrainians, conscripts were ordered to patrol. Incidentally, this resulted in a reduction in the time needed for substantive training. It is known that this base was of great importance to the Russians, as on February 24, 2022, 18th I-76 took off from here, which sent the Airborne Brigade to capture the VDW in order to seize Hostomel Airport. And here, elite units of the 76th Airborne Division strategically landed in Belarus. What is important is that to this day, about 30% of the combat capabilities of the base in Pskov have been preserved. And now in 2024, even the Americans asked whether a division using 70-year-old tanks can be considered elite. Where did this come from? It came from the fact that the Ukrainians filmed how the 76th Airborne Division set out with support from T-55A tanks, specifically those from the early series, meaning from the 1950s. It is known, however, and this is nice information, that the cemetery established next to the already known military cemetery in Pskov is being dismantled. The second target of the Ukrainians, which the Estonians really like, is the Ostro Airport, 80 kilometers southeast of Estonia, and Solsi, 150 kilometers from the border with Estonia. Here it is used as a jump base for landings, for refueling, and for loading weapons during attacks on Ukraine. There is no greater developmental activity, rather than construction, visible in these bases, but these bases are still operational. And this is where the good news ends, because there are several bases that show signs of use. And these are signs of continuous use. It is evident that equipment is there. Military units are being trained. They are going to the railway and heading to Ukraine. But not only. According to the Estonians, some equipment is completely new. Former commander of the Estonian Defense Forces, Martin Herem, claims that when these parking positions in the bases were emptied in February, in the summer of 2024, tanks, vehicles, and Kama trucks returned to their places. So Herem asserts that they have quite a good recovery capability. 120 kilometers from the border with Estonia, halfway between St. Petersburg and Pskov, is Luga. This is one of the largest Russian military centers, one of the most important for a potential attack on Estonia. This city is home to, among others, a brigade equipped with at least 12 Iskander missile systems. But what about those with a range of 550 kilometers? It is enough to launch them from Luga, and they practically cover all of Estonia, and the base has been thoroughly modernized since 2014. By the way, there was a scandal involving theft. Several people were arrested, but still, the base has been modernized, providing quite decent air defense capabilities. It would have to be decent, but that would need to be checked in practice, meaning during an attack. But the missiles are already stored in bunkers, and they are air-conditioned. It is worth adding that the Russians use anti-aircraft and anti-ship missiles as ground-to-ground missiles. And outside of Estonia, there are many such bases where batteries like Bal and Onyx are located. And it turned out that there are also redoutes. There are also these redoutes. There are 12 such small bases. And like Luga, they have good railway connections. And here Luga is a transfer center for the 2S-19 Meissner S. And 2S-1 loaded at the turn of May and June from Luga to Ukraine. And what turned out, according to the Estonians, the howitzers were produced only this year. And here the Ukrainians estimated in talks with the Estonian Defense Forces that the aggressor brought completely to the front. New self-propelled howitzers, Emsta and 2S-43, Malwa and 640. I absolutely do not believe this. Absolutely. because I have data that of those captured or burned howitzers, at least half were refurbished. They were taken out of deep storage and refurbished. There is no possibility for the Russian industry to produce even 640 howitzers in 6 years. This is impossible. Impossible from the perspective of the engine industry. It simply cannot supply that many engines or transmissions. I assess the problems with the barrels, so with the barrels, I estimate that there were likely about 30% new in total. So let's say about 150, maybe 150, maybe 200, and that was gathered from other units. Then yes, and then indeed. And if there were the muster here. Because the production of the 2S-43 Malwa is actually minimal. There are few chomics, if there are any at all. If they do, they come from military units that simply hand them over and are equipped with other equipment. From what I've heard, that other equipment is the 2S-1.
I mean, apart from that, the production of ammunition for the Hyacinth B has most likely been reactivated. There was a separate type of ammunition for all of this, innovative for that time, but it did not pass.
Well, warm indeed, because it turns out that the Hyacinth B, which are towed, are not interchangeable with the Hyacinth S, which are self-propelled when it comes to ammunition.
And yet they have recently been significantly moved to direct them to the units.
Yes.
There is this invention, D-70. Am I saying it correctly?
Yes.
Something that remembers Stalin when it comes to the concept. We will see. Here, the Estonians claim that Russia's production capabilities in 2022-2023 have increased because a large number of CNC machine tools for metal processing were successfully imported from Taiwan, despite the sanctions. And that is why there was a strong crackdown on Taiwan. And Taiwan has officially closed the export possibilities of CNC machine tools to Russia.
Yes, besides, they were actually importing those machine tools from mainland China, not from Taiwan. They are still introducing them, but the control systems of those machine tools are completely different. There are problems because they require quite skilled technical service. What are the qualifications of the technical service personnel brought in? For example, from the food industry to the defense industry. One can easily imagine that. And how do I know it's from the food industry? Because the relevant minister complained that the defense industry took 30% of the workers from the food industry. So, I personally don't believe it. To quickly train a person who made cheese, in order to operate complex CNC machinery, where at least 5 years of experience is required.
And I will add something to this garden, one little stone. Listen. Most likely there was some acquisition of this equipment or someone recognized it in use. What's going on? A new weapon has appeared, as it was initially described, among the Russians. It's about what is still lacking. Let's remember, the Russians at the lowest level, that is, in the squads, have received Model 73 machine guns. Everyone immediately starts looking up what that is. So I will now show you the Model 73 rifle, which is the unlicensed North Korean version of the well-known RPD, that is, the handheld and Dragunov machine gun for the intermediate cartridge 7.62, meaning for the intermediate round 7.62 X39, known from Africa, where it performed reasonably well, but is very sensitive to contamination and easily gets dirty and jams. And this is the new...
From my experience, I will say that this rifle was a horror. I had it, and unfortunately, it was that you could only shoot in short bursts because the beast would jam. The basic element for it was a wooden piece of branch used to remove the casings that got jammed. And wooden because, God forbid, a metal one would cause a wild uproar, as it could damage the delicate closing mechanism.
Well, let's say that the North Koreans modified it a bit to an even lower level of technical culture than they had. It is possible that it became more reliable, but listen, this is a production hit from North Korea from 1973. Even the Russians no longer used it, but designated it for deep, very deep storage, which they eventually had to access and cleaned out.
Exactly. But returning to our Estonian sheep, Kamenka is near the border with Finland, northwest of St. Petersburg, 100 kilometers from Narva in a straight line. The 138th Motorized Rifle Brigade is stationed there. In recent months, a tent city consisting of 120 tents for about 2,000 soldiers has been erected at the training ground near the base, which is half of Brigade A. Approximately 30-40 trucks and light armored vehicles with new paint have appeared at the base, meaning battalion maneuver units. Similarly to the larger bases, Kamenka is connected by a railway line, which facilitates the movement of trained units further east and south to Ukraine. But it is known that in 2022, Russia announced it had nearly 120,000 soldiers and 1,000 tanks in the Western Military District. This district, as we know, has been divided, and this is the district that is fighting in Ukraine. Both of these districts. However, it is known that the 6th Combined Army is opposite Estonia. Here it includes the 138th Motorized, in Kamenka, the 25th. Motorized Infantry Brigade in Łódź, and rocket units also located in Łódź. Now, we can include the 76th in this army. Airborne and the 2nd Special Forces Brigade. Although this brigade is theoretically subordinate to the GR, now this reform will double the number of soldiers, which currently stands at 19,000, and it is expected that the 138th and 25th Brigades will be raised to the division level. The 44th Army Corps would have its main headquarters in Petrozavodsk on the Finnish side. The direction south of Estonia will be the responsibility of the 1st Armored Army, which would operate, for example, with some Belarusian units. There aren't many of them, trying to cut off the Suwałki corridor. The Russian leadership sees the need to return to the concept of a mass army to continue the war with Ukraine and prepare for a possible conflict with NATO. Thus, in February of this year, stated the Estonian Foreign Intelligence Service, and now we also have, additionally, we have Hochiwovo Airport, an Air Force center, between Moscow and St. Petersburg. There are large ammunition depots and a large modern warehouse built there. And here the Estonians took General Hots, who is quite hot-headed, stating that he considers the Russian threat to Estonia and other Baltic states to be very real. The Russians are clearly already in a state of war with us, even if we do not admit it ourselves. He speaks, referring to the destruction of underwater cables, acts of sabotage across Europe, airspace violations, cyber attacks, and hacking. With these operations, Russia is testing the West to see how we will react. If there is no reaction, Russia will become bolder. Estonia must be ready for war, claims Hodges. If Ukraine loses or the United States, the United Kingdom, France, or Germany allow Russia to win. In this case, Russia will redirect soldiers and take over part of the Ukrainian military equipment and restore its army reserves in a few years towards the Estonian direction. Here, we have talked a lot. A lot has already been said about the Russian budget. We know that the Estonians predict that in 2026 it will be 12.8 trillion rubles, which is 121 billion euros, and in 2027, 13.1 trillion rubles, which is 124 billion euros, because there is even more, as there is also a secret budget.
Additionally, let's add an average of between 3.5, and I think it will increase due to inflation up to 4 trillion rubles for FSB, Special Operations Forces, and similar.
One must also consider the secret budget. That is a lot.
The secret budget, yes. The secret budget is completely...
11.4 trillion rubles this year.
So if this year's budget is 36 trillion rubles, we have 12.8 plus 3.5, which would mean that almost the entire budget goes to fighting.
Well, they claim that currently it is indeed approximately 40% of the budget, aiming for a kinderchidoti, 60% by 2027.
It has already been over 60% now, counting the secret budget.
Yes. The dramatic increase in Russia's defense spending suggests that Russia expects a war that will last longer than a year, says Colonel Ansky Vilsek. Whether it will take place in Ukraine or another region is another matter, but the Russian Federation is preparing extensively for it. Here, Jerry Saska, Feiko Wello, and Estonian generals. Martin Herem believed that the complete annexation of the Baltic states is not scenario number one. Why? Because the Russians would face 1 million fighters from the resistance movement and Stalinist purges would be rather impossible in the current world.
Let's indeed say this to those who lived in Bucha when the Russians occupied it.
This is not about the destruction of the entire city, as that is not a problem for the Russians. It's about packing 100,000 people onto trains and deporting them, just as was done during Stalin's time in Estonia. Now that would be rather unlikely, partly because the RDRZ is in a state of agony.
This is primarily because the war has derailed the RDG, and now they will account for 10% of their wagons, which is at least $100,000.
And about 7% of locomotives, right? Well, in some cases, but these are already photos. I have a photo from Chelyabinsk, Budyshchaya, showing that some steam locomotives are returning in good condition. What?
They currently have coal.
They definitely have a coal reserve, so no worries. Global warming is being temporarily put aside. There is a war, so they must have something to ride on. Well, if they ride, it must be on that, right? Now then, here, the most likely scenario is an attempt to seize part of Estonia, aimed at making demands on the West. This would sow fear in societies and divide NATO allies. What military response would be proportional? Although he claims, I don't think Russia has territorial ambitions beyond the Baltic countries and possibly part of Poland, perhaps part of Poland. Interesting. The real goal would be to dismantle NATO, showing that the alliance and its members are not ready to help any country. One can imagine a hypothetical scenario in which Russian troops enter Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia, occupy part of them, then stop. And the political leadership of Russia asks, do you really want to start a nuclear war over this? If anyone's response were negative, it would mean the end of NATO and Article 5. Martin Herem also believes that a Russian attack would be limited.
May I jump in right away? Yes, because now, what General Ben Hodges presented here, I believe that this type of Russian approach is mega, super, hyper in their style. What he described, they would act exactly like that. Are you sure you want to put your head on the chopping block? That's one. Two, they know well that the first one to come up with an initiative other than collective defense will be who? Viktor Orbanienko, prompted by Fico.
Yes, prompted by Putin, but that is better.
Prompted by Fico, but from afar, like puppets, they are directed from Moscow.
Of course, because that's what it's about. At this moment, an interesting question arises about which part of Poland Chodzys had in mind.
Is it about the Suwałki Gap region? Like
Suwałki, right?
Underwater or something more?
Or something more, right? And here is a very important matter that Herem claims that an early warning about such an operation would not give Estonia much time. Why? Because in previous conflicts, Russia gathered ammunition at some training grounds during exercises for many years before the conflict began. And all of this can be recovered during so-called future exercises and used for waging war. And Ukraine's experience shows that the deployment of 200,000 people took 18 days. And here, I will say that we have had from the beginning, we had full coverage here, full cover of this, and we knew there would be an attack, we as NATO. So we knew 18 days is quite a lot. And here Herem says, Russian math is like this. You are 1, so we give 3 plus fire support. And then we should be able to defeat you. If we can't manage, we will add more fire support. If there is a lack of artillery support, the second line will come, and then the third, and that way we will get through you, because by then you will be too weak. So the tactics from the Winter War, as you might be aware, right? 39-40.
Or an enhanced version of Zhukov.
Yes, or an enhanced version of Zhukov's tactics. And it's interesting that the former division commander, General Wakoel Lopalm, claims that Estonia's position is somewhat better than Ukraine. Why? Because the Russians are dependent on roads. We have too few roads. The capacity is not good. The same applies to railways. And here I give as an example that when the 76th Airborne Division was moved from Pskov to the border with Ukraine at the end of 2021, it was first transported to St. Petersburg and only from there bypassing Moscow to Ukraine, because it was faster than a more direct route and less noticeable for civilian traffic. General Palm generalizes that the Russians essentially have only a few places on the coast of the Gulf of Finland where they can set up radars to monitor the sea between Tallinn and St. Petersburg, and the Estonian Defense Forces have already identified these locations. Here he claims that the safest for Estonia and the most dangerous for Estonia is Russian weaponry, with a large operational depth, as well as the Skandaries in Łódź, because they can essentially shoot at Estonia directly from their garages. Therefore, the transfer of fire is at the top of the list of priorities for Estonian defense planners. For Estonia, valuable targets are all the locations that the Russian army must use during a conflict. Stationary positions, airports, bases, areas of dislocation or support in the rear where ammunition and supplies are concentrated. If the operation remains at the level of the Leningrad military district or the 6th Army, we will likely see very limited targets and the takeover of areas only covering dozens of kilometers, predicts Palm. To do something bigger, they would need to establish a separate command post of the General Staff to coordinate cooperation between different branches of the armed forces. However, this is a difficult operation for the Russians. I would say very difficult. They have already stumbled several times on such joint command.
But there is one caveat. Let's remember that at the moment they have quite well trained, I would say, staffs of some armies. This is what Maciej Korowai has described multiple times regarding how they function. The Russians have certainly managed to achieve a certain quality in all of this, and I will tell you what the problem is. To transfer the supply of this type to a new location, having already experience in conducting joint operations, none.
Exactly.
And to throw them into St. Petersburg, into the Admiralty bunkers, to keep them safe, no problem.
So here, what do the Estonians claim? The problem is the different arrangements of the Shens, which still require vehicle reloading to this day. From one train to another in Lithuania, Hodges says that in the worst case, one can wait 2 or 3 weeks for allies to arrive from elsewhere. This means that in the event of resistance, one will have to rise from what they have. For example, from the British and French forces that are there, NATO air forces will likely appear immediately. So the Estonians would not be alone, but they would not see a long column of Abrams tanks in the first 2 weeks. So here, the Estonian Defense Forces and the Ministry of Defense calculate that based on this analysis, an additional 1.6 billion euros is needed. This includes the purchase of ATACMS long-range missiles, with a range of 300 kilometers, or those with an even greater range, the R, up to 500 kilometers. And here is Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad comes into play as a base for the Russian Baltic Fleet, and most of the armaments and combat units are located in Baltijsk, with 52 warships until recently, but Russia also took 60–70% of its ground equipment from the exclave for the war in Ukraine. This had a minor overall impact on the Navy and missile forces. Commander Iri Saska, who was the commander of the Navy in Estonia, claims that the Baltic Fleet would be used in 3 cases: landing in some location to secure a foothold for the Russian army, establishing a no-fly zone for NATO in some part of the Baltic Sea using ships capable of air defense, or supporting Russian ground operations with ships carrying caliber missiles. I will say right away that, in my opinion, only this third option is possible.
I will allow one thing completely. The ships of the Baltic Fleet are not large vessels. There are many of them, but they have different characteristics. For example, the Karakurt. Some are not typical combat ships. So from all this, let's add one more thing. There have been very big problems with the engines. Recently, there have often been fires during, yes, the engines of many ships, those smaller ones, and the engines from the Zvezdochka company, such engines that we are currently replacing with MTU engines in our ships. Unfortunately, something strange was happening. We are even considering sabotage issues. Not. Long ago, there were nice photos from Frombork showing large plumes of smoke, and it wasn't an aircraft carrier, supposedly an aircraft carrier from Kuznetsov, which appears there with a frequency of, let's say, every week or two, because something is burning in their naval bases. But let's not forget one more thing. Even moving towards actions against Estonia, I will remind you of Maciej Korowai's concept of Operation Seahorse. They must neutralize Gotland.
Yes, that is unfair.
They must neutralize at least. And for that, they will sooner use special forces, a combined operation using civilian ships,
container ships and the like, but there is one problem. The 2nd Mechanized Brigade, which will be stationed, is already stationed. Elements are stationed in Gotland.
Only partially.
It is only partially developing very quickly because it concerns one thing. It's not about the Russians capturing Gotland, but about them taking a foothold where they will set up elements of medium-range air defense. Then NATO would really have a problem.
So medium range, which means a mix of Buk systems, Tor systems, and at least S-300.
That's right, at least if not Triumphs. And at that moment, NATO would indeed have a problem flying over the Baltic Sea, but then such air defense systems could not be within the range of direct conventional artillery, meaning at least that foothold would need to be 40 kilometers deep.
Well, that's quite a lot. Let's not forget that the other 2 Baltic countries are also acquiring HIMARS, and in the case of ATACMS with a range of 300 kilometers, they will be able to smash such a foothold and the air defense systems located on it.
Yes, here is a note from the Estonians that here are the calibers of NKW, which are equipped with Buzhaniem can carry nuclear warheads, that there is a storage of tactical nuclear warheads, that it is possible to store up to 100 warheads there. And we are saying this, meaning we, the Poles. And here, Jerry Saska claims that Allied units are numerically and qualitatively better than the Russians in Kaliningrad. But in the case of war, the threat coming from Kaliningrad would be one of the first to be eliminated. However, hybrid operations that do not require the application of Article 5 are a much broader grey area. And now, at this very moment, the village of Parusnoye is currently entering 15 kilometers from the main base, that's right. 560, the first special naval intelligence point, Speknaz base. In Parusnoye, according to the Estonians, a new training building has been constructed, the helicopter landing pad has been renovated, and a deep water reservoir has been built, illuminated at night, and used for underwater training. The permanent staff of the base consists of 120 soldiers and officers. But our elite experts claim that this is one of the most dangerous units the Russians have at hand, as the Corps has been trained for anti-NATO missions on the Baltic Sea coast and specifically against strategic targets in Lithuania and Poland.
I flew to the village of Parusnoye and the entire special training center. Because this village, Parusnoye, is close to the Baltic, I analyzed this when I was dealing with the Nord Stream 2 topic and the sabotage on it, where it turned out that they had the means, they had the capability, and for some time this base was deserted during the period just preceding the act of diversion on Nord Stream and a few days after. No one has been able to strictly link this to the end, but the absence of this unit there at that time is documented.
Let's remember the Danish submarine that photographed a Russian unit intended for deep water operations in the nearby area, practically right above the Nord Stream lines, the day before the sabotage. This is a picture of the word.
And that is why I completely agree with your opinion. Assessing this unit and the content of this unit as extremely dangerous in the Baltic Sea basin.
Exactly. Here, the Lithuanians claim that one of the objectives of this 561 unit from the base in Klaipėda and its infrastructure is that it is an important point for Lithuanian observations for Lithuanian and NATO operations. And now, the training plan for Russian saboteurs prepared in 2015, allegedly obtained by the Lithuanians. One of the sections of the plan contained orders for this unit to cross the Lithuanian border unnoticed within 10 to 12 days, its forces, and focus on a specific location on the Baltic Sea coast. A monitoring post was to be established there, and intelligence activities were to be conducted, with tasks including the sabotage of port infrastructure, such as loading cranes, piers, or docks, in order to paralyze NATO's ability to supply or deploy forces for operations in the region. Here in Cherniachovsk, still in the exclave, there is talk about the 152nd Rocket Brigade operating Iskanders and S-400 air defense systems. This is significant. And this container, that is the OTH radar over the horizon, a radar system that is supposed to have a diameter of 1,200 meters with 150 antenna masts and a range of 3,000 kilometers. However, the construction is slow. This construction would be destroyed on the first day of fighting. And one can be sure that this threat would be eliminated immediately.
I would like to remind you that the Ukrainians have already attacked such facilities as this radar.
What surprises me about this plan? What surprises me is the complete absence of Polish units in this plan. That means they are talking about Kaliningrad. They are discussing what a threat it is, and they are citing all the bases, etc.
One must ask whether Poland is even considering an immediate attack on this exclave in the event of a conflict with Russia, with the aim of eliminating this threat. If they do not take this into account for Estonia, it certainly means they do not take us into account, which undoubtedly implies that the Polish army will not strike at the exclave. This worries me because we should be demonstrating the right initiative at this moment and occupy that exclave as soon as possible, pacifying everything that is there.
Of course, we should do it as quickly as possible. But it is clearly the case that they do not have information from us, or there is no cooperation, no exchange of information about what we intend to do with this. Because we certainly have plans.
But the fact that there is no mention at all is even strange.
Yes. It is only mentioned as if, Poland, allies are somewhere. There is a lot said in this report about the French, about the Americans, a bit about the Germans, but not much. It is clear here that the issue with the brigade in Lithuania made the Estonians think, while nothing about the Poles. This means that the cooperation has somehow broken off, and that is a very bad sign.
Yes, a very bad sign. I hope that Polish operational plans do foresee actions involving a transfer to enemy territory
Exactly. And here, Maciek, I think we should finish because this is the most important issue we have discussed, and I will be honest. As of now, no such official report has been created by the Lithuanians or the Latvians officially. Yet, this is the only report we currently have at the moment, which we are thoroughly dealing with and which talks about the possible aggression against the Baltic states. Interestingly, the authors of the report claim that they consulted it with the Estonians and Latvians, and they agree that if a Russian attack occurs, it will come from the direction of Estonia.
So this is a certain imperative. They are aware of it and take it into account. It would be good if our planners also conducted appropriate analyses considering the situation before the effect of the Eastern Shield appears, then using elements of the Eastern Shield, and the fact that transferring the fight to the enemy's territory makes sense, because losses primarily occur in the enemy's infrastructure and eliminating the threatening exclave, where nuclear payloads may be stored and likely are, namely the Kaliningrad Oblast. With its capital in Kaliningrad is a highly vital and strategically important point of our interest in order to neutralize this risk.
Absolutely. This is the most important thing for us, and it is crucial that in the next reports there is some involvement of Poles, as it would mean that some communication is taking place.
However, I wouldn't want it to be one or another consulting firm living off producing reports, which, if one were to delve into what Anya Diner used to write, when she was still at the publication, as someone put it, ruined their market.
I don't mean that. I mean that the next report should include a suggestion for cooperation with Poles as entities, because that is important.
I keep saying that Poland should have these expeditionary units and have this rapid reaction division consisting of the 6th, 25th, and possibly eventually the 22nd Mountain Infantry Brigade, so that we can have one as our mobile aeromobile reserve and be able to send one even to the south if we need to support one of the southern ones, up to and including our allies in Romania, and the other one that can be sent quickly to the Baltic states.
Exactly. Just as you say, that would be the best.
And here I believe that NATO, as such, should care about us having the capability to simultaneously deploy 2 such brigades by air, using heavy helicopters, for example.
Yes. Yes, well, on the other hand, we should also have our own.
For at least one private, for the second one, I think it would be for that.
Exactly.
Should it be financed, just integrated into the transport aviation wing?
Yes, well, I think we will end here. You will draw your own conclusions.
Exactly, you will draw your own conclusions. We have said what we believe should be, and if some Russians are watching this, well, yes, my dear Russians, dear, you will be dear when you hear what is for you. That is, before justice.
That's right, absolutely, exactly.
And with this optimistic note, we conclude. We wish you a nice long weekend. We hope everyone has a very positive weekend. Not too cold, but nice. For those planning any outdoor activities related to Independence Day, may it all take place in a pleasant atmosphere, and may everything be safe. We wish you all the best, and say goodbye in the end. Goodbye from Kopulka, Marek, Meissner, and Maciej Lisowski. And if you liked it, remember that your likes do good. We thank everyone who helps us. We encourage you to support our social media, to support the Captain Lisowski channel, and to give advice on advertisements. And to everyone who is already helping and supporting us, we sincerely thank you for that. Have a nice long weekend to all and sundry. Bye. Bye.